The unexpected prisoners. Ethan Carter opened his eyes to darkness and pain. His head was throbbing, and his body felt weak. The last thing he remembered was the battlefield, gunfire, explosions, and the alien soldiers of the Zerk Empire attacking his unit. Now he was here, trapped in a cold metal cell. The walls around him were made of black stone, glowing faintly with strange alien symbols. The air smelled different, heavy, sharp, almost electric. His hands were tied with thick metal cuffs, and a red light blinked on the ceiling. He wasn't alone. Across the cell, a tall alien woman sat against the wall, staring at him with glowing violet eyes. She had sharp features, dark purple skin, and short silver hair. Her body was covered in strange tattoos, and she looked dangerous. Ethan noticed her arms were chained, just like his. The woman smirked. "You're awake, human." Her voice was low and rough, like she had been in too many fights. Ethan tried to move, but his body ached. "Where are we?" he asked. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Welcome to Cell 42, inside the Black Dagger prison. The worst place in the galaxy." Ethan's heart sank. He had heard about this place. The Zerk didn't take human prisoners. They executed them. But Black Dagger prison was different. It was where the Zerk Empire threw away criminals too dangerous to kill. Murderers, rebels, and monsters. He stared at the alien woman. "And who are you?" She leaned forward, the chains clinking. "Syra Varzin. And if we don't get out of here soon, we're both dead." A prison without rules. Heavy footsteps echoed outside the cell. The metal door slid open, and a huge Zerk guard stepped in. His red eyes glowed under his helmet, and his black armor had the mark of the overlords, the rulers of the Zerk Empire. He looked at Ethan, then at Syra, and smiled. "Good. You're awake." Ethan tensed as two more guards entered. They were carrying strange devices, metal collars with blinking lights. The first guard spoke. "Mating season is starting." He chuckled darkly. "Let's see how long the human lasts." Ethan frowned. "What the hell does that mean?" Syra cursed in her language. Her body stiffened, and for the first time, Ethan saw fear in her eyes. The guards unlocked her chains and threw the collar around her neck. When it clicked, Syra gasped and fell to her knees, clutching her head. Her breathing became heavy, her muscles tensed, and her violet eyes burned brighter. Ethan's instincts screamed at him. Something was very wrong. "What did you do to her?" he demanded. The guard smirked. "Her kind. They have instincts, human. And when the mating fever starts, they lose control." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The guards were watching them like they were part of some twisted experiment. The first guard leaned down. "Fight her. Kill her, or she'll tear you apart." Then the three of them laughed and walked out, locking the door behind them. Ethan turned to Syra. She was breathing heavily, gripping the ground like she was fighting something inside her. "Syra." Ethan took a cautious step forward. She snapped her head up, her glowing eyes locked onto him. Her voice was strained. "Stay away from me, human." The danger inside the cell. Ethan could see her struggling. Her muscles twitched, and her fingers dug into the floor. She was fighting an instinct she couldn't control. "What's happening to you?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Syra took slow, ragged breaths. "Zerk, we are not like humans. Our biology, it is different. When the fever begins, our body demands a mate, or a fight." She clenched her teeth. "If I lose control, I won't be myself." Ethan's heart pounded. The guards had thrown him into a death trap. Either Syra would attack him, or he would have to fight her to survive. He took a step back, hands raised. "Okay, let's just stay calm. You're strong. You can control it." She laughed, but it was bitter. "You don't get it. This isn't about control. It's about biology." Ethan glanced at the door. The guards were watching. They wanted to see him die. He looked back at Syra. She was shaking, her sharp nails digging into the floor, her breath coming out in short gasps. She was losing the fight. He had to think fast. There was one bed in the cell, a small metal table, and a few loose stones in the corner. No weapons, no way out. Syra groaned, gripping her head. Damn it. Her eyes flickered back to Ethan. And for a moment, she looked almost human, like someone who didn't want to be a monster. Ethan made a choice. He wasn't going to fight her. He was going to help her. He moved closer, slowly. Syra, listen to me. She growled. Don't. He ignored her. You are not a killer. You were thrown here for a reason. If they wanted you dead, they would have killed you already. Her breathing slowed. Her claws, still sharp, stopped shaking. Ethan nodded. We find a way out. Together. Syra stared at him, her glowing violet eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she exhaled. You're insane, human, she muttered. Ethan smirked. Probably. Outside the cell, the guards were still watching. They expected violence. But instead, something else was happening. Inside the cell, a dangerous alliance was forming, and neither Ethan nor Syra knew just how deadly it would become. The heat begins. Ethan Carter sat against the cold metal wall, his heart still pounding from the last few minutes. The cell was silent except for the heavy, ragged breathing of Sarah Varzin, the alien woman locked in with him. The guards had left them alone after activating her collar, a cruel experiment meant to turn her into something uncontrollable. They had laughed as they walked away, expecting bloodshed. But so far, Syra hadn't attacked him. Not yet. She crouched in the corner, her back to him, her claws digging into the stone floor. He could see the tension in her muscles, the slight tremors in her fingers. She was fighting something. Ethan knew one thing for sure. He was in deep trouble. Something was changing. Syra, he said cautiously, not moving from his spot. She flinched at his voice, her breath hitching. Her glowing violet eyes flickered, filled with something raw, something wild. You should stay away, she muttered, her voice hoarse. Ethan had faced Zirkai warriors before. He had fought them in battle, seen their ruthless combat skills, their incredible strength. But Syra, she was different. She wasn't acting like a soldier. She was acting like an animal trying to hold back its instincts. What's happening to you? Ethan asked, keeping his tone calm. She gritted her teeth, her sharp fangs glinting in the dim light. It's the collar, she spat. It forces the mating fever to start early. Ethan frowned. Mating fever. Syra let out a short, bitter laugh. Of course, humans wouldn't understand. She dragged her claws across the stone floor, leaving deep scratches. My species. During mating season, we go through a biological shift. It increases aggression, strength, speed. Instinct takes over. Ethan's stomach twisted. The guards had done this on purpose. So, what? He asked carefully. You're going to try and kill me. Syra closed her eyes, her breathing sharp and uneven. I don't want to, she admitted. But if the fever takes over, I might not have a choice. Ethan exhaled slowly. This was a trap. The guards had locked them together, expecting Syra to lose control and rip him apart. He wasn't about to let that happen. A prison experiment. Ethan scanned the room, looking for anything that could help. There was nothing. Just cold stone, metal walls, and a single metal bed attached to the floor. The only way out was the door, locked tight with an energy seal. But Ethan wasn't thinking about escape yet. First, he had to figure out how to keep Syra from losing herself. How long does this fever last? He asked. Syra exhaled heavily. Naturally. A few days. Ethan stiffened. A few days. He didn't have hours, let alone days. But the collar, she whispered, her claws scraping against the stone again. It's making it worse. It's forcing the fever to rise faster. If I don't. She cut herself off, letting out a shuddering breath. Ethan swallowed hard. If you don't what? Her eyes flicked to him again. And this time, there was a strange hunger in them. Not just aggression, but something deeper. Something primal. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. If I don't find a way to control it, I'll either attack you, or my body will start shutting down. Ethan's mind raced. The Zerke were biologically different from humans. Their mating season was a biological necessity, not a choice. The guards had turned it into a game. And he was the prize. He exhaled sharply. All right. So how do we stop it? Syra laughed bitterly. You can't stop it. Ethan narrowed his eyes. There's always a way. She looked at him, studying him for a long moment. Then she sighed, frustrated. There's one way, she admitted, but you're not going to like it. A dangerous deal. Ethan's gut twisted. He already didn't like it. Tell me, he said firmly. Syra hesitated. For the first time, she looked uncertain. She exhaled slowly. My species, we don't just fight during the fever. We bond. The fever is meant to push us toward one thing. A connection. Ethan stared at her. Are you saying? Syra cut him off, her voice sharp. I'm saying we have two choices. Either I fight to the death, or I anchor myself to something stronger than the fever. Ethan understood. She needed a focus, a way to resist the primal urge. She needed him. His jaw clenched. You don't even know me. Syra snorted, her sharp teeth showing in a humorless smile. I don't need to know you, human. I just need something strong enough to keep my instincts from taking over. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. This was a dangerous game. If he did this, if he let her anchor to him, what would that mean? Would she be able to fight it? Or would it make things worse? He looked into her glowing violet eyes. She was waiting for his decision. He could already feel the heat rising in the cell, the charged energy in the air, the way she was fighting to stay in control. If she lost that fight, he wouldn't survive the night. Ethan took a deep breath. There was no other choice. He stepped forward. Tell me what I need to do. Syra's eyes darkened, her lips parting slightly as she watched him closely. Then she whispered, Don't run. No matter what happens, don't run. Ethan nodded. He wouldn't. Outside the cell, the guards were watching with amusement, expecting to see a violent, bloody battle. They had no idea what was really about to happen. An unlikely alliance. Ethan Carter didn't move. The air inside the cell was thick, hot, and charged with something he couldn't explain. The walls, once cold and lifeless, seemed to pulse like they were breathing. Or maybe that was just his own mind playing tricks on him. Across from him, Syra Varzin crouched low, her sharp claws digging into the stone floor. She looked like a predator barely holding back from attacking, her glowing violet eyes flickering between rage and restraint. Her body was shaking, her breathing fast and uneven. The collar around her neck pulsed with a dull red light, feeding the fever inside her. The Zerke mating fever, a biological process designed to push her species into combat or connection. And Ethan was the only one locked in with her. Her voice was low, dangerous. Don't move. Ethan stayed perfectly still. She clenched her teeth, her fangs flashing for a moment. Good. The line between predator and prey. Ethan's military training told him to analyze the situation. Enemy status. Syra was not in control of herself, but she was still fighting the fever. Environment. A small locked cell. No weapons. No exits. Possible outcome. Either she overcomes it, or he doesn't survive the night. Not great odds. You said I could anchor you, Ethan reminded her, his voice calm. How? Syra hissed, gripping her head. I can't think. Ethan took a slow step closer. She snapped her head up, eyes locking onto him, but she didn't attack. That was something. Syra, he said, forcing authority into his tone. "You're stronger than this. You're a warrior, right? Fight it." She growled, shaking her head. "It doesn't work like that, human." Ethan gritted his teeth. He could see her struggling, see the fight happening inside her body and mind. If she lost, she would attack. He had no doubt she could rip him apart with her bare hands if she wanted to. There had to be another way. Then it hit him. "If the fever needs connection," Ethan said slowly, piecing it together, "then maybe all you need is a different kind of bond." Syra's breathing hitched. Her fingers twitched. Her pupils dilated slightly. Ethan took a calculated risk and did the last thing the guards would have expected. He stepped forward and put a hand on her shoulder. The experiment was failing. Syra froze. For a moment, everything went still. The burning violet in her eyes dimmed. Just for a second. The shaking in her limbs lessened. Then she exhaled sharply, her claws retracting slightly. "That?" she muttered, blinking like she was confused. Ethan kept his hand there. "Steady." "This is control," he said, keeping his voice low. "Focus on this, Syra." She was breathing slower now, the raw, wild hunger in her gaze shifting to something more aware. It was working. The guards watching through the security cameras wouldn't be happy about that. The prison's dark secret. Ethan was no fool. This wasn't just a game for the guards. This was an experiment. The prison wasn't just a prison. It was a testing ground. The guards weren't just watching for entertainment. They were collecting data. The collars, the fever, the forced proximity. It was all planned. Ethan had seen too many war zones, too many experiments on human prisoners to miss the signs. They weren't just being kept here. They were being studied. Which meant someone wanted to see what happened when a human and a Zerk were forced together. Ethan's grip tightened on Syra's shoulder. "This isn't just about you and me, is it?" Syra let out a bitter laugh, her body still tense, but her mind clearly working again. "You finally figured that out, did you?" Ethan nodded grimly. "They're running a test. And we're the test subjects. A plan to escape." The prison guards thought they were in control. They thought Ethan and Syra would either kill each other or lose themselves to their instincts. But they had underestimated human adaptability. And they had underestimated Syra. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said. Syra smirked, her fangs flashing. "Now you're talking, human." But before they could plan their escape, a loud alarm blared through the prison. A deep voice echoed from the speakers. "Final test begins in 24 hours. Ethan and Syra shared a glance. Whatever was coming next, it was going to be worse than anything before. "The hunt begins." The alarm screamed through the prison, a deep, guttural sound that made the walls tremble. Red warning lights flashed violently, painting the dark stone in an eerie glow. Ethan Carter's muscles tensed as he exchanged a quick glance with Syra Varzin. She was breathing steadier now, her claws no longer shaking with uncontrollable aggression. The fever was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but she had fought it back. For now. "Final test begins in 24 hours. The robotic voice repeated the message twice before falling silent. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about control. The guards had been playing their little experiment, but now they were moving to the next stage. And whatever this final test was, it wasn't going to be easy. A prison turned hunting ground. The door to their cell slid open with a loud hiss. Ethan and Syra stood still, waiting. No guards, no weapons, just an empty corridor bathed in red warning lights. Syra's ears twitched, listening carefully. Her expression darkened. "They've released everyone," she murmured. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She gestured toward the far end of the corridor, where distant echoes of growls, shouts, and screams filtered through the air. "They've opened the cells. All of them." Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a test. This was a hunt. They're forcing the prisoners to kill each other, Ethan muttered. Survival of the strongest. Syra's lips curled back into a snarl. No, not strongest. Most ruthless. A deep roar thundered through the corridor, the sound of something massive moving in the darkness. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Syra's arm. We need to move. She nodded, and together they sprinted into the unknown. The arena of death. As they ran through the corridors, Ethan took stock of what they had. No weapons, no idea of the layout. Dozens, maybe hundreds of deadly prisoners loose, and something even worse lurking in the shadows. Not great odds. They turned a corner and nearly crashed into a fight. Two Zerkai warriors were locked in battle, their claws flashing as they tore into each other. One of them, a hulking brute with dark red skin, ripped the throat out of the other with his bare hands. The red-skinned Zerkai snapped his head up, his glowing eyes locking onto them. Ethan felt the predator's gaze settle on him. Syra stepped in front of Ethan. He's mine, she growled. Ethan didn't argue. The warrior charged at them, but Syra was faster. She moved like a shadow, ducking under his massive arms and driving her knee into his ribs. The warrior roared in pain, swiping wildly, but she was already behind him. With one clean motion, she grabbed the back of his head and snapped his neck. The Zerkai collapsed with a heavy thud. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Remind me not to piss you off. Syra smirked, wiping the blood off her hands. Smart human. They had no time to rest. More sounds of battle echoed through the halls. And then, a different sound. A deep metallic voice. Subjects located. Engaging. Ethan barely had time to react before a massive mechanical beast crashed through the nearest wall. It was twice the size of any Zerkai, its body made of black metal and shifting plates, its glowing red eyes locked onto them, and its arms unfolded into jagged rotating blades. Ethan cursed. That's not a prisoner. Syra's expression was grim. No, that's one of the Overlord's pets. The mechanical monster let out a piercing shriek before launching itself at them. Fighting a monster, Ethan and Syra dove in opposite directions as the machine's bladed arms slammed into the ground, slicing through the stone like butter. Ethan scrambled for cover. No weapons, no armor, no way to fight this thing head-on. Syra, however, didn't hesitate. She leaped onto its back, her claws digging into the metal. The machine whirled violently, trying to shake her off. Ethan spotted a weak point, a blinking panel near its spine. Syra, aim for the back. There's a control node. She growled in response and drove her claws deep into the panel, ripping out a chunk of wires. The machine screeched, its body sparking wildly. It lurched to the side, crashing through a wall, sending debris flying. Syra jumped clear just before the machine collapsed, twitching and sparking. Ethan exhaled. Remind me, why are you in this prison again? She dusted herself off. Political reasons. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. He was definitely going to die here. The truth revealed. Before they could recover, the intercom crackled to life again. A deep, inhuman voice spoke. Subjects 42 and 76 have exceeded expectations. Proceeding to final phase. Ethan froze. Syra's eyes narrowed. They're watching us. Ethan looked around at the blinking cameras. The overlords had been testing them this whole time. And now, they were taking it to the next level. The floor beneath them shook. The walls split open, revealing a massive arena beyond. And in the center, something enormous moved. Ethan's breath caught as he saw it. A creature unlike anything he had ever seen before. 12 feet tall, covered in thick black armor. Its 4 glowing eyes locked onto them. It let out a deep, rumbling growl, the ground cracking beneath its feet. Final phase. They had survived the hunt. Now they had to survive the beast, the monster and the secret. The arena was huge, a massive underground chamber with high walls made of obsidian metal, humming with energy. Floodlights blazed down from above, illuminating the center, where a monstrous beast stood waiting. Ethan Carter's breath caught in his throat. The creature was massive, at least 12 feet tall, with a hulking, armored body covered in black chitinous plates that shimmered under the lights. Its 4 glowing red eyes locked onto Ethan and Syra, analyzing them with an eerie intelligence. Its clawed hands flexed, and its tail, long, bladed, and razor-sharp, slashed the air behind it. Ethan swallowed hard. "Tell me that's a normal Zerk creature." Syra Varzen didn't answer. She stood frozen, her violet eyes locked on the beast, her expression filled with something Ethan had never seen before. Fear. "No," she finally whispered. "That's not Zerk." The intercom crackled again, and the deep, inhuman voice spoke. Subject 42. Subject 76. Final trial. Eliminate the Apex. Ethan's fists clenched. Apex. This wasn't just a random monster. It was engineered. Syra's body tensed. "Ethan, listen to me." He turned to her. Her face was grim. "That thing. It's not just here to kill us. It's here to evolve." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Syra's claws flexed, her breathing uneven. "They've been experimenting on prisoners, combining DNA, trying to create the perfect warrior." She nodded at the monster. "That's their result." Ethan's stomach tightened. The overlords had been testing them this whole time, not just for survival, but for something more. And now, they had put them against something that was never meant to exist. The battle begins. The Apex let out a deep, rumbling growl, then moved, faster than anything that size should be able to move. Ethan barely had time to react before it lunged forward, claws aimed straight for his chest. He threw himself aside, hitting the ground just as the claws sliced through the air where he had been standing. Syra was already moving. She darted to the side, her claws slashing at the Apex's exposed ribs. The impact barely left a scratch. The Apex roared, swinging its tail like a whip. Syra jumped back just in time, but the shockwave of the impact knocked her off her feet. Ethan's mind raced. Syra's claws weren't enough. The Apex was too fast, too armored. If they didn't find a weak point, they were dead. A desperate strategy. Ethan looked up at the high walls surrounding the arena. Energy barriers. The overlords were watching. They wanted to see the Apex kill them. He wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. Syra rolled back to her feet, wiping blood from her lip. "Got a plan, human." Ethan exhaled. "Not a good one." She smirked, her fangs flashing. "Wouldn't expect anything else." The Apex charged again. This time, Ethan didn't dodge. He ran straight toward it. Syra's eyes widened. "Ethan." The Apex swung its massive claw, but at the last second, Ethan dropped to his knees, sliding under it. He twisted his body, grabbed one of the loose metal shards from the broken arena floor, and drove it into the Apex's leg joint. The monster let out a deafening screech, stumbling for the first time. A weakness. Syra's eyes flashed. Got it. Before the Apex could recover, she leaped onto its back, digging her claws into the same weak point Ethan had targeted. The Apex thrashed violently, trying to shake her off. Ethan saw his chance. He sprinted toward the fallen machine from their last fight, the one Syra had destroyed in the corridors. Its energy core was still sparking. The risky move. Ethan ripped the core free, feeling the raw heat burning through his gloves. It was unstable, volatile. Perfect. He turned back to Syra. "Hold it still." She snarled, gripping the Apex's armored plates. "Hurry." Ethan ran full speed, his body screaming in protest, and jumped. At the last moment, he shoved the energy core into the wound Syra had made. The Apex's eyes widened. Then, boom. The core detonated, sending out a massive shockwave. Ethan was thrown backwards, crashing against the hard arena floor. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. For a moment, Everything was silence. Then the apex collapsed. Its body twitched once, and then it stopped moving. Ethan coughed, pushing himself up. His vision was blurry, but he could see Syra, standing over the apex's body, breathing hard. She looked at him, her violet eyes burning. They had won. The Overlord's reaction. The intercom crackled. The deep voice returned. Unexpected outcome. Ethan smirked. Didn't think we'd survive, huh? A long silence. Then, a different voice. One that sounded less robotic, more human. They're adapting faster than predicted. Retrieve them. Ethan's smirk vanished. Syra stiffened. Retrieve. Before either of them could react, the arena floor shook again. Gas hissed from the walls. Ethan's body felt heavy. His limbs refused to move. His vision blurred. No, Syra growled, trying to resist, but she collapsed beside him. Ethan's mind screamed at him to move, to fight, to do anything. But the darkness swallowed him whole. Escape or death. Pain. A dull, throbbing pain echoed through Ethan Carter's skull as he regained consciousness. His body felt heavy, his limbs refusing to move. The air around him was thick, artificial, filled with the sterile scent of a laboratory. His vision swam as he forced his eyes open. Bright lights, cold metal, the distant hum of machines. He was no longer in the arena. Instead, he was strapped to a vertical containment pod, his arms and legs locked in place by metal restraints. Dozens of monitors and cables were attached to his body, beeping softly in the background. A hissing sound caught his attention. Ethan turned his head, his heart lurching. Syra was in a similar containment pod beside him, still unconscious. Her arms were bound in thick restraints, and strange black wires were connected to her collar, pulsing with faint energy. He clenched his jaw. They had been captured. And whatever the overlords had planned for them now, it wasn't going to be good. The hidden laboratory. A deep voice echoed from nearby. You are awake faster than expected, human. Ethan's blood ran cold. A tall figure stepped into view. Unlike the armored guards they had seen before, this being wore a long metallic robe, its face hidden beneath a smooth, reflective mask. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath the surface. Red, cold, calculating. Ethan recognized the insignia on its chest. An overlord. The beam tilted its head slightly, studying him like a scientist observing an insect. You survived the apex. Impressive. Ethan's jaw tightened. Yeah. Sorry to ruin your little experiment. The overlord ignored his sarcasm. Instead, it stepped closer to Syra, placing a long, clawed hand over the controls beside her containment pod. Ethan's instincts screamed at him. What are you doing to her? He demanded. The overlord finally turned toward him. You misunderstand, Subject 42. Its voice was smooth, artificial, amused. She is not the experiment. Ethan's breath caught. The overlord gestured toward him. You are. A terrifying truth. Ethan's mind raced. What the hell are you talking about? The overlord tapped a button, and a holographic screen appeared in front of Ethan's pod. It displayed a biological scan of his body. Ethan's stomach twisted. The data. It wasn't normal. His DNA was different, altered. His muscle density, bone structure, neural pathways, all enhanced. Something had changed him. The overlord observed his reaction with eerie patience. Your exposure to the Zerke fever should have killed you, human. And yet, not only did you survive, it leaned forward slightly. You adapted. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. You did this to me. The overlord let out a small mechanical chuckle. We merely set the conditions. Your own biology did the rest. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. His body felt stronger, more responsive, but it wasn't natural. He wasn't just human anymore. The final experiment. Ethan forced his voice to stay steady. So what now? You keep us locked up in here. See how much more you can mess with my DNA. The Overlord's glowing eyes flickered. No, Subject 42. We have already gathered what we need. The restraints on Cyrus' containment pod tightened. Ethan's chest tightened with panic. What are you doing? The Overlord's voice was emotionless. Now that we understand your transformation, there is only one variable left to test. What happens when we take away your anchor? Ethan's breath stopped. Cyrus stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Ethan. The Overlord pressed a control pad. And suddenly, Cyrus screamed. The breaking point. Her body arched against the restraints, a surge of electricity crackling through her collar. Her violet eyes glowed brighter than ever, her breathing turning ragged. Ethan fought against his bindings, rage boiling in his veins. Stop it. The Overlord merely observed. She is the only thing keeping your biological changes stable. If we remove her influence. Syra let out another painful gasp, her body shaking violently. We see what happens when you lose control. Ethan's vision blurred. A pulse of heat burned in his chest, spreading through his limbs. His skin tingled, his heartbeat pounded like a war drum. Something inside him snapped. The transformation. The containment pod shattered. In one violent motion, Ethan ripped free from the restraints, metal and wires snapping apart like paper. The Overlord barely had time to react before Ethan moved. Faster, stronger, unstoppable. He slammed his fist into the Overlord's chest, sending the massive being flying across the room like a ragdoll. The Overlord crashed into the far wall, sparks and blood spilling from its mask. Ethan didn't stop. His entire body felt different, more powerful, more dangerous. The guards rushed in, weapons raised. But Ethan was already on them. With terrifying speed, he dodged the first plasma blast, grabbed the nearest guard's rifle, and snapped it in half with his bare hands. Syra was still struggling against the electricity. Ethan turned toward her pod, and in one clean motion, he tore the collar straight off her neck. The energy field died instantly. Syra collapsed forward, gasping for breath. Ethan caught her, his arms steady. She blinked up at him, her violet eyes wide. What the hell happened to you? Ethan looked down at his hands. They were different now. His veins pulsed with energy, his muscles stronger, his reflexes faster than any human alive. He exhaled sharply. I think I just failed their last test. The escape. Alarms blared across the facility, signaling reinforcements. Ethan looked at Syra. She grinned. We breaking out of here? Ethan smirked. Dan right we are. Syra cracked her knuckles, her claws extending. Then let's burn this place to the ground. The intercom crackled one last time. Warning. Subject 42 and Subject 76 have escaped containment. Full lockdown initiated. Ethan clenched his fists. Time to finish this. Freedom and truth. Alarms wailed. Red warning lights flashed across the facility, bathing everything in a sinister glow. The walls trembled as security systems came to life, turrets deploying, doors sealing, automated defense drones swarming like mechanical wasps. But Ethan Carter wasn't the same man who had been captured. The Overlords had tried to make him a test subject. They had made him something else instead. Now they were about to regret it. Beside him, Syra Varzan cracked her knuckles, violet eyes burning. This is going to be fun, she muttered. Ethan smirked. Let's tear this place apart. And then they ran. The breakout. The first wave of drones descended from the ceiling, plasma rifles heating up, aiming for center mass. Ethan moved before they could fire. One step, then another. Faster, faster. Everything slowed around him. The air felt different, lighter. His new reflexes kicked in like second nature. He jumped, twisting midair, grabbing one of the drones and ripping it apart with his bare hands. Sparks and metal rained down like shattered glass. Syra followed his lead. She leaped up the wall, using her claws to slice through another drone, then landed gracefully, rolling into a sprint beside Ethan. The hallway shook violently as security turrets dropped from hidden panels in the ceiling, their barrels glowing red. Ethan didn't slow down. He reached out, his fingers wrapping around the barrel of the nearest turret, and crushed it like paper. The metal groaned under his grip before it snapped in half. Syra let out a whistle. "I really need to get me some of that human DNA." Ethan shot her a grin. "You wouldn't be able to handle it." They kept running, dodging plasma fire, weaving through the chaos like ghosts in a war zone. Then, they reached a control room. The Overlord's secret. Ethan slammed his fist into the control panel, breaking the security lock. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with holographic displays. The Overlords had been watching them. Every screen showed footage from the prison, the experiments, the arena. But one display caught Ethan's attention. A galactic war map. Human territories. Zerkai colonies. Military bases. And then, a third force. A symbol neither human nor Zerkai, marked in black. Ethan's chest tightened. "Syra, look at this." She stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "This war," she whispered, staring at the screen. "It wasn't just between humans and Zerkai." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "We were being manipulated." A deep voice interrupted them. "Very good, Subject 42. You see the truth now." Ethan and Syra whirled around. The Overlord from before stood in the doorway. But this time, it wasn't alone. Two massive warrior-class hybrids flanked it, creatures that looked part Zerkai, part machine, and something else entirely. Something worse. The Overlord stepped forward, unfazed. "You were never meant to escape," it said, voice smooth and eerie. "You were meant to serve." Ethan's fists clenched. Not happening. The Overlord sighed. A shame. Then it lifted a hand, and the two warrior-class hybrids lunged. The final battle. The first hybrid swung a massive, bladed arm at Ethan. He ducked, barely avoiding the slash, then countered. His fist connected with the creature's chest. Bones cracked. Armor shattered. The hybrid staggered back, wheezing. But the second one was already on him. It grabbed Ethan's throat, slamming him against the wall. His vision blurred for a second, but only for a second. Then, pure adrenaline kicked in. Ethan grabbed the creature's arm and snapped it like a twig. It howled, dropping him, and Ethan didn't waste a second. He grabbed the hybrid by the head and ripped it apart. Across the room, Syra was dancing between attacks, claws flashing like lightning. She moved like a shadow, slipping behind her enemy and tearing through its spine in one clean motion. The Overlord watched, expression unreadable. "You were not meant to win," it said. Ethan grinned, blood on his knuckles. "Yeah, guess we missed the memo." The Overlord sighed. "Then I suppose it is time for me to deal with you myself." A god falls. The Overlord moved faster than expected. One moment, it was standing still. The next, it was right in front of Ethan, its claws aiming for his heart. But Ethan was faster. He sidestepped, caught the Overlord's wrist, and twisted. Snap. The Overlord let out a mechanical screech, stumbling back. Ethan pressed forward, punching straight through its chest. The Overlord's eyes flickered. It staggered. Then, it fell. Silence. Syra let out a breath, shaking blood off her hands. "Well," she muttered, "that was satisfying." Ethan exhaled, glancing back at the war map. The truth was clear. The war had been engineered, controlled. And now, with the Overlords dead, it was time to end it. Freedom and a future. They found a hangar deep within the facility. A sleek black warship stood waiting, its engines humming softly. Ethan glanced at Syra. "So, you coming with me?" She smirked. "Wouldn't miss it." They boarded the ship, locking onto coordinates. The war wasn't over. But now, they knew the truth. And Ethan Carter, he wasn't just human anymore. He was something more. The overlords had tried to create a perfect weapon. Instead, they created their own downfall. As the ship blasted into the void, Ethan smiled. The fight had only just begun.